Howdy, my name is Corey Pelletier. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma. I teach our assessment class in single case, which actually aligns pretty nicely with what we're going to talk with you about today.
And my name is Dr. Cynthia Massey. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Southern University. I also teach our assessment classes at the college, and we are going to talk to you today about progress monitoring. Progress monitoring is a collection of data that we use to determine if a student is making progress. And our video today is the first in a series of videos that are going to talk to you about the benefits of progress monitoring. Our essential question today is, how do you determine if a student is making adequate progress towards socially significant end of the year goals? Our objectives are to talk about the benefits of engaging in progress monitoring, what are the critical attributes for creating a structure for progress monitoring, how we identify how, we're also going to talk about identifying how to evaluate progress monitoring data. So we'll start. What are the benefits of progress monitoring? Progress monitoring provides us with efficient and interpretable data. It helps us determine when and how to provide more intensive interventions. It helps us track progress towards important end of the year goals and annual goals on a student's IEP. And it's very easy to share data with our stakeholders. It's important to know that you can progress monitor in many areas. It doesn't just have to be academic. We can also progress monitor behaviors and social skills.
And we'll put the plug in now. We're going to have subsequent videos that walk through different content areas as well as behavior and social skills.
Yes. So we want to talk about creating a structure for progress monitoring. It's important to know that the NCII has a framework that they've created. We're going to link this at the end of the slide, but we're going to talk to you about database individualization at this point. It's very, very important to understand that database monitoring and progress-based monitoring is a way of objectively presenting information to our parents. And the reason that it's considered to be objective is because we standardize certain things, certain components of our information to make sure that it's not subjective. So things that we look at are, you want to make sure that you progress monitor at the same times each day or the same day of the week. You might get different data on a Monday morning as opposed to a Friday right before a pet run or something like that. Also, you want to make sure that all of the people doing your progress-based monitoring are trained so that it's consistent as to how the progress monitoring data is collected. Of course, you want to make sure that your materials are similar in nature and assessing the same information each time. And you also want to consider the environment that you're going to progress monitor in. You wouldn't want to do it in a loud room with lots of distractions one time, in another room that's very quiet, no one is there to bother the student a second time, because that might skew your data.
Yeah, it's really important. By standardizing all these things, what you're doing is you're reducing any error that's going to be added to your data. And if the more error, by unstandardizing some of these variables, we're going to add error. And the more error in our data, the more likely we're going to make poor decisions because our data just is meaningless. It's filled with error. So now I'm going to talk to you about how to evaluate progress monitoring data. And basically there's going to be, I have 5 steps listed here, but we'll talk through these. The first thing we need to do is add an aim line. The next thing we need to do is add trend lines within phases. Then we can calculate the rate of improvement for a quantitative index for how much the student is improving per week. We'll then consider the consistency of the data within phases. And then lastly, we'll use all of that to make a decision about instruction. So the first thing you'll see here is we have an aim line drawn. The very first data point on our graph is actually representative of typically three administrations of a CBM. So oftentimes we'll administer a CBM maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the week. We'll take the median point and that what will be plotted on our graph. Each subsequent week, we just will collect one data point and plot it. The aim line is connecting that first baseline data to the very end of the year goal that we've set. Oftentimes the end of the year goal is going to be provided to you by whatever progress monitoring tool you're saying. So it will state something like, hey, the end of the year goal or the end of the year criterion is, in this example, I think it is 80 words correct per minute. So that's what is plotted at week 35, which is the end of the school year. And all you do is you draw a big red thick line so you can see it. And that is showing you what the student needs to be progressing at per week to meet that end of the year goal. The next thing we would want to do is to add trend lines. In a subsequent video, I will show you some different approaches for drawing trend lines, but basically a trend line is showing you what the slope or rate of improvement is for these different phases. And you can see in this very first phase, the student's slope, the trend line is very flat because the student is not progressing. As we changed instruction, you can see this trend line or the slope is steeper, meaning the student is now, basically his rate of improvement is higher. And then from here, we can then think about quantifying, let me move this box. We can think about quantifying the rate of improvement. And you can see the formula here. You take, for the aim line, you take the end of the year criterion, which is 80. You subtract away the baseline data point, which is 30. And then you divide by the 35th week, subtract the first week. And that gives us a 1.47 rate of improvement. So what that number is telling you is each week, the student needs to be gaining 1.47 newly correct read words. And then you can see for instructional phase 1, we go through that same formula and we found the student was only progressing at 0.6, which means the student was only gaining 0.6 newly correct words read per week. That number is drastically lower than the aim line, right? So we know the student was not progressing. So the team opted to change instruction, which is what this vertical dotted line means. And then I calculated the rate of improvement for instructional phase 2. We go through the same formula and we see the rate of improvement for instructional phase 2 is 1.8. That rate of improvement is steeper than the aim line, meaning if that rate continues to progress across these subsequent weeks, the student's data will begin to fall above this aim line. The last thing that's important to consider is how stable is the student's performance or how consistent it is. And when we ask that question, we basically can draw trend lines and we look at how closely are the data points nested around that trend line. If the data points are very spread out, that could tell us a couple things. Either the student is just showing you variable performance, which is not good, right? We want students to be able to exhibit the same performance or skill level on any given day. The other thing that could tell you is if we think back to the standardization of our administration, that also could point to the fact that, hey, there's a lot of bounce in this data merely because we are doing a poor job of collecting data, right? We might be collecting it Friday afternoons, Monday mornings. We might have a paraeducator helping us and not following the standardized process. There's a whole bunch of error issues. So if you see inconsistent data, that tells us that, hey, we need to take a closer look at what is happening here because this is not good for us making decisions. Oh, and I should say in this example, we can see the data is very stable. It's all clustered around this trend line. It's pretty clustered around this trend line. So then all we do at the very end of this is we kind of use all of these elements to make a decision. We're either going to reduce intensity, which might be basically, if we're thinking through an MTSS framework, that might involve moving a student back down to tier 1 or moving a student from tier 3 to tier 2. We might keep instruction the same. Whatever the student was receiving is working, we're going to keep them there, or we might make the decision that we need to increase intensity. So in this example, the team collected data for 6 weeks, and we saw that the last 5 data points were all below the aim line. We looked at the rate of improvement. It was 0.8. That was below the rate of improvement needed by the aim line. So the team considered all of those things and made the decision to increase intensity after the first phase. Now we have the second phase of instruction. So this could be maybe tier 2 intervention now, tier 3 intervention. Who knows? We didn't really contextualize this to the fullest. But from here, the team says, okay, the student is now progressing at 1.8, which is above the aim line. He is still below the aim line right now, right? So that some teams might opt to try to increase intensity right now because the data is still below the aim line. We might not have the logistical, we might not have all of the tools necessary to do that. So I would feel very confident keeping the student in the current intervention and then waiting a couple more weeks to see if the data points begin to get above this aim line. So I think keeping everything's the same. The last consideration would be the consistency. As we mentioned before, for this data, it's pretty consistent. So I don't necessarily have concerns about our standardization of the data collection process. Here's 4 more examples that just hypothetical. So if we walk through some of these things we're talking about, here's our aim line, here's these data. All of the data points are below this aim line. So we could go through calculating the rate of improvement, but I actually don't need to do any of that hard math right now, right? We can clearly visually see the student is below, right? So this student needs an intensified intervention. The data is pretty consistent, I would say, in this phase. If we look at this graph right here, all the data points except this one are actually above the aim line. So this student is making adequate progress. We can keep this student trucking along in what they're doing. If we look at this bottom panel, this student is clearly progressing at a rapid rate. All of their data, the slope of this trend line is very steep. So depending if this student was receiving an intensive intervention, we actually might opt to try to reduce intensity because this student may not need that intensive instruction based on their progress. And then this last student example, this would clearly hint to me that I'm concerned about our data collection. The student's performance is all over the place. So whether that's we might not be standardizing things, our probes might not have high parallel form reliability, or the student, who knows, it could be an inter-student thing where the student is demonstrating basically variable performance. And that's something that we'd want to seek out. And this student is not progressing adequately for us. So we would need to figure out what is happening here. So now we're going to review. So a couple things, hopefully today, by the end of this video, you feel like you've achieved the following. Progress monitoring data informs if a student is on track to meet socially significant end of the year goals, right? That is the goal of why we collect this data. The second element is we need to standardize the administration protocol. This will increase the reliability and validity of the data we collect, which will inherently increase the reliability and validity of our decisions. So hopefully you can think about creating a standardized protocol that you can train paraeducators on, train general educators on, or train your colleagues on. And third, you will be able to evaluate progress monitoring data following those 5 steps. We'll have subsequent videos that will walk through in a little bit more detail how to construct your own graphs and then calculate all of those elements together.
So finally, we just want to share a few extra additional resources in addition to the videos that we are going to be working on in the near future. There's the IRIS Center, which is through Vanderbilt University, NCII, National Center on Intensive Interventions, Center on RTI, and the National Center on Intensive Interventions. And on the last slide, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Thank you. Have a great day. We hope you learned a lot.
Thank you all.